Hello, 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 and welcome to Tea with Halo, the podcast of the Enchanted Academy. I am Halo Quinn. I am a pagan author, a storyteller, and I am a practicing modern day witch. I teach both magic and witchcraft. And so, as someone who does that, I'm really curious about how other people go about sharing that old wisdom and new wisdom woven up through those practices of magic that underlie so many of the modern pagan traditions and that are woven throughout some of the ancient practices as well. So I have gone around and found some lovely, lovely people, including today's guest. So this is Tea with Daniela Simina. Daniela is a fellow Moon Books author and writes on a topic that is very, very dear to my heart, working with the fair folk. But what really excites me around that is that Daniela has a very different background to me, and so looks at some of those cross-cultural pieces from those practices that are in her history, her family, her land of origin, I suppose would be a good way of putting it, as well as crossing cultures and into where she lives now and other places. So as someone who has only ever lived on one island, though different parts of it, like that experience of the spirits of the places of the fair folk in those different places is really fascinating to me. And I am absolutely delighted to have you here. Daniela, would you like to say anything to introduce yourself, your practice, anything you'd like to say, anything you want to correct me on?
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be here with a fellow author, so well known for your wonderful work with the fair folk, both as a practitioner, so directly involved and walking the path that you're talking about, as well as a writer and a teacher. So thank you very much. And thank you, lovely audience, for paying attention, taking your time to watch us in this discussion that we're about to have. So about myself, I grow up steeped into fairy lore and folklore. It is something that my grandmother used to practice. She was a medicine woman, practitioner of folk medicine, but she was also known as a fairy seer. And by fairy seer in Romania, that's where I come from. By fairy seer over there is intended a person who interacts visually in other ways with the fairy beings, with the fair folk, receiving knowledge from them. And this knowledge can pertain to healing, can pertain to foreseeing things in the future, a little bit of psychic ability to foretell the future, as well as carrying out tasks assigned by the said fairy beings, like in my case would be researching and educating and trying to build more of that lore and folklore into modern day spiritual practices. I'm a pagan, specifically a heathen, so I'm really strongly anchored into Norse-Germanic paganism. But as an author and a amateur folklorist researcher, I like to look at the parallelism and where cultures in Central and Western Europe cross each other, cross their paths, and there is so much. It's beautiful to look at the underlying threads while paying attention of the beauty that lies within diversity. So yes, here I am writing comparative studies about fair folk from Romania, from Ireland, and the Scandinavian areas as well. So yeah, that's about me.
I really love that. So there was something when I was growing up, I was looking for, I've always been absolutely entranced by the fairies, by the fair folk, because I could feel those spirits there. And that was the best term I could find for it, as like little 5-6 year old Halo going, what is this? Right. And so I was kind of like looking for what information I could find, and a lot of what I could find was what was popular. It was like Irish or elemental stuff. And as I got older, I found my way into heathenry as well. And the lore there around the Alvar and the spirits of the landscape, of course, being in Britain, it resonated with what I was actually finding. The Irish stuff, yes, okay, like that did as well, but it had
Mhm.
a lot of medieval gloss over it. Whereas here, I was what I could access, like the
Mhm.
information I could access across the ocean. Um, so it like I love what you're saying about that researching those pieces and looking for those threads. So for you, then this is a family path, a family tradition. Why do you feel that it's important? Why do you feel that they have asked you? You said this is one of the tasks they've given you, like to actually teach and educate and share about this outside of your family with like in books. That's with a huge amount of people, hopefully.
Yep. So that's a very, very good question for two reasons. Firstly, it is quite well known that in the vast majority of the situations, or what we come across from folklore, like real authentic folklore, what comes across is that fairies actually demand secrecy.
Mm,
They don't want to be called fairies, so apologies in advance, whoever might be listening to the conversation. I'm using it because if we go into using a different terminology, we would turn this conversation so cryptic that our audiences would completely lose any interest in it. So fairy is going to be as a generic term for beings sharing the same traits across the cultures that we may eventually tap into. So there is this demand for secrecy. On the other hand, when you keep things very, very secret and fewer people know about it, you, on the other side, as an entity, you're also kind of losing your agency and power, or is getting diminished, at least at the place where it interfaces with the human world,
mm-hmm,
at least in that regard. Because over time, along the time, throughout the history, we have the example of people offering lavishly to fairy beings because they were in control of a family or a person's luck, the fertility, fruitfulness of your own land, cattle may not sound like a big deal for us today, but for those who lived on a farm and their life depended on the milk the one cow was producing. So back then, honoring and connecting with the spirits was very important from both a spiritual perspective. They occupied an important place in the spiritual beliefs of people throughout history, but also from a very practical reason, we need this collaboration, the support of the spirits that are dwelling in the land. Some of them are land spirits, some of them are ancestral spirits, some of them are other kind of spirits, but we need their support in order for us to be able to live in this place where we're living now. If they get infantilized, which happened throughout the Victorian era, and rewriting of folklore to accommodate the sensitivities of a certain population and to be made accessible to very young audiences, like, educational material used for children. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not the folklore. And with the overproduction of that and completely shifting the view in that direction, people reduced the amount of attention and respect, consequently offerings that they were giving to the fair folk. And a number of consequences followed. So it is only in the interest of, as, as I see it is very much beneficial to the fair folk for people to be educated and knowledgeable about how they are. or how they can be, and what they can do, they, the fair folk, can do, and what is their role, at least for the part that can be explained and comprehended by the human side. What is their role in this ecosystem? Not so much in the otherworldly ecosystem. We don't care much about that, but we care about this one, the world that we live in. So there is also the belief, because I started with firstly, that would be secondly, there is also the belief that things that are happening on one side in our world influence, for better or for worse, what happens in their world on the other side. And what happens there influences what's happening here. So again, if there is no communication, if there is no understanding, and for them it's probably easier to gather understanding, gather intelligence about us than it is for us to gather intelligence about them. So if there is not enough knowledge how to do things and why to do things, then we can perpetuate an already precarious state that worlds are into. So I believe I'm by no stretch of the imagination do I try to suggest that I'm special in any way. And wow, I got these assignments by the fairies. So no, because I see this happening at a global scale. And I see more and more people being drawn toward working with fairy fair folk, and alongside, not with in the sense that you tell them what to do, because this seldom ends up good for the human involved, but alongside. And to work, I mean, think that you're starting a work work venture, investment, what have you, with a foreign partner. You have to have a common language. Otherwise, without communication, things are not going to end well. And in order to acquire the language, you also have to have understanding of the other person's cultural, like mutual understanding of one person's culture and values, and what's important to them and what makes them thrive, and what makes them really, really upset and turns them off. And then taking all this into consideration, you can go on into partnership. So for us humans to build this partnership with our otherworldly guides and allies, possible allies, we have to have this understanding. And someone needs to actually contribute their own experience and take the risks, because it's also a risk. When you're talking about, I have a relationship with fairies, you're going to be given the looks, you're going to be ridiculed, you're going to be, unless you're able to ground what you're saying into examples and into research and bring in a historical perspective and talk about it in articulate and intelligent ways, people are not going to take you seriously. It is one of the reasons why people in the countryside during the Industrial Revolution and with the event of industrialized, more modern, more technologized societies, people in the countryside started to back off from sharing and talking about their experiences because they were ridiculed or they were considered not in the fullness of their mental faculties. Therefore, they shut down. And this came at a cost, because you don't need me to tell you, but from an ecological point of view, we're not getting in the right direction worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
So this reconnecting with the world of fairy, with acknowledging the existence of another dimension that runs in parallel, overlapping, or really bleeding into ours, into various places, various times, it is really important. We're not the only one, humans, I mean, we're not the only people in this world. Other kind of beings are entitled to, I mean, they have, not that are entitled, are persons as well. They have personhood, and we should be respectful. So, and this is what I'm trying to do basically in the classes that I teach and in the articles and in the books that I write. So this is in a cocoa nutshell.
And that's to reintroduce people to that relationship between
Yes.
human and fairy. I love how you sort of clarify at the beginning. It's like that term fairy historically has at points been considered to be somewhat disrespectful. But today it is the term, the English language term that is used. I mean, it has non-English roots. It's Latin originally, I believe. So
Yeah.
the fate connected to
Yeah,
fate.
the fata.
And I love how that's moved in Spanish, de las hadas, with the H, and then Italian. So like we've got these connected words, but obviously the most common language for various reasons, for many of us that we communicate in is English. So fairy is that English language term, tiptoeing around questions of
Yeah.
yeah. And so that piece about it being some at points being considered disrespectful, or also being considered that there was that thing that you don't speak their name. Like we lost the old English word for bear because it was considered to be something that would call, if you said it, the bear would turn up. So we now have the word bear is actually a nickname, and it's the same. The fair folk, the fairies, that in itself is, I've tangled up a whole bunch of things here, but it's that piece of speaking their name to call them into the space. And at this point in history and the cultures that we are in, it's kind of actually important to speak their names and remember them and to invoke them into our conversations and into our memory culturally. And that is the term that does it. So one of the reasons I think that historically we wouldn't have done, and that it was considered disrespectful, is because they might turn up and they were quite scary because they were powerful. Well, they're still powerful, but we've forgotten them, and we've forgotten that, and we need to remember. So calling them into the space, and that sort of brings up that question of true names and language and the power of the voice. So
the power of the voice, that's so beautiful. This makes me shift for a second into Norse, into Scandinavian mythology, where we have the Norns.
yes.
And the Norns, the most commonly encountered image of them is they're pictured as spinning, like spinning wool. But in the actual text, they are described as speaking orlog, which is the fate, which is speaking, laying the layers of what will be or shall be, speaking layers of truth that are being deposited, and it's speaking them into being. Parallel to this, we have, again, from Scandinavian saga material, we have the portrait of the Völva, which is, or the practitioner of Seer, which is a practitioner of magic, and she is invited into different homes and farms to prophesize for the year to come. However, there's something very striking here. She not only speaks about, like looking into a, tea leaves and saying, oh, I see this, and this coming. Through the words that she utters, she has the power to influence them. Therefore, some household members are sometimes, that's what we gather from the saga material, are very happy with what she prophesizes. So, because they know from their previous experience, from their fathers and grandfathers' experience, they know that what the women speak comes to pass. And they have the ability to shape fate with their words that Norns just mentioned. So very much emulating that power through their speech. And we have examples in the saga of them, for some reason, not saying what the audience wanted to hear, or not expected, so leaves them very scared and also displeased because now they know something bad's afoot. And the opposite, where she prophesizes, she speaks, and in the way she speaks, she actually shapes into being what's about to come in ways that are actually very pleasing for the audiences, and she gets rewarded. So what we think and the way we phrase, express our thoughts verbally and non-verbally, it is very, very important. It has power. And sometimes there is a disconnect in between what exactly we think and what we say, or
Mm.
what we feel and what we say. The disconnect may be in between the way we utter our thoughts and what we actually feel deep down into our heart. So one big effort that it is required is to align what you feel and what you think, bring it into alignment, and then utter the specific words. And this brings me to calling on fairy, or mentioning fairy and fairy beings. The word fairy actually came into English to replace the older English form elb, alb, that was the elf, Scandinavian elf, and it was said we don't mention them because that can bring them about, like making them, to come over, and this is not exactly what you may want to experience. So that was based in a belief that people hold very, very strong back then. Because you can say fairy, fairy, fairy without really having that strong belief into it. And probably if you say 50 times the word, I'm not sure the being will manifest unless it really gets upset and comes to punch you in the face or do something to make you stop.
Yeah.
So that's always an option to consider, to avoid. Um, but if there isn't like real belief, you can engage with, I don't know, charms or magic or recite something. And you may think that you're doing it the right way, but it can be just a mechanical way.
Mm-hmm.
So what actually will bring things into being is how much of your heart, how really you are behind your spoken words.
Yeah.
So, and I think this is really important in trying to work alongside or building partnerships with the fair folk, with the fairy beings, regardless of culture. If you like, found out, it's kind of a universal rule, you really have to be behind your words. And if you really want to um, experience and tune in and start to communicate, you really have to mean it. Because otherwise it's either not going to happen at all,
Mm-hmm.
or happen in a way that you'll not want to try it again.
Yeah.
So mindful of what you're saying, how you're saying, and what are your true feelings about it. So that's a good journaling prompt, I guess, when you're
Yeah.
writing things down. This is how you really feel it, or it's just how you're coming up with it in your hand and your head, and you're trying to make it look nice on paper.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful point, both in dealing with spirits, and that's making sure that all of the parts of you are saying the same thing. Because while that piece that you're saying, that while your words are saying one thing, if your heart is saying another, if you don't really mean it, that's a lie. Oh, put my hand up. um that's that's
Yes, please.
there you go. That's a lie.
Mhm,
And this is where that piece of, or for me, this is part of that piece of being truthful and having a true heart, um,
mhm,
when dealing with the fair folk in particular, but spirits in general.
mhm,
And there's also that, when you're doing magic, as you say, when you're engaging with charms, I often teach my students that there are many parts of us, and we've learned to kind of compartmentalize and push down our feelings and like sit in our heads and all the pretty words. and separate out our like how our body actually feels. And like culturally, many of us have learned to divide ourselves up and not
Mm-hmm.
listen. And so if we're thinking, oh, I'm going to do a spell for this, like I want something or other. I, um, I want a new house. Well, let's say a new lover. I want a new lover.
Mm.
There you go. This is why people say don't do love spells, right? I want a new lover. And you write that intention into your thing, and you're saying it, and you've chosen intellectually, you've chosen like red candles, pink candles, and rose petals, and all of the things, and you're going new lover, and you've got all the symbols there, and you're chanting and you're whatever. But actually, in your heart, you don't feel you're worthy. Or actually, in your heart, what you really want is space to love yourself, space and time to find out who you are and what you really want, space and time to go adventuring and explore the world on your own, space and time for just a bit of peace. And your heart deep down knows that like another person in your life is just going to add more time and complications and distractions to take you away from that. Then when you're doing that spell, either you're only bringing your mental part of yourself to it, so that's only a tiny part of you doing the magic and you don't have enough power, or you bring the mental part of yourself and your heart turns up and is pulling you the other direction. And so this is why, like I teach my students, if you want to do spell working, you need to make sure that all the parts of yourself agree and are working together. And perhaps you really do deep down want a new lover, but first you need a holiday. Have a holiday first,
Yes,
then consider the
absolutely.
ethics of calling in a new person into your life.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is like, and speaking of, I'm gonna tie the two together.
Mm,
Everything that you said is like brilliant. And the other one, the shaping, the faith.
yeah.
And I see this happening when people are learning divination systems
Mm,
and you start memorizing mechanically what's the Ogham, the Irish Ogham, or one of the rune alphabets, let's say Younger Futhark, and they learn mechanically and they read mechanically, as opposed to taking the time and spending time to get to know each Ogham marking, or because it's a very popular tree in as it relates to the Ogham alphabet. By the way, Ogham is more than just a tree alphabet, but tree alphabet is a very popular choice,
mhm,
and I love it personally. So taking the time with each of the symbols and what do they represent in a broader context, and how do they speak to your heart, and then based on what you feel, start pulling, extracting, teasing out meanings from what has been recorded in older historical manuscripts, and see how those align, and maybe they don't align. And then um, creating new meanings, knowing that they're not universal, they apply to you and your own experience, and resist the temptation to make them, this is the ultimate truth. No, this is the truth for me now, and it may even change 5 years down the road. So having that kind of flexibility and depth and courage to
mm,
ground what you're doing into your true feelings. Logic is important. Mental activity is important. Being like overly emotional and completely bypassing the mental logical aspect, I don't think that's a good idea. That doesn't serve anybody. But finding a balance, and certainly listen to what's authentic, what comes truly from you to inform your practice. Otherwise, like you, Halo, said, you're just reciting empty words with no energetic support, because the energy, your feelings, that's what lends the energy to whatever you're doing. Magic, teaching, divination, and everything else, creating relationships. It's like, yeah.
Absolutely. So, how would you suggest to people that they, because for some people it can be very difficult to know what it is that you're feeling emotionally, or like that intuitive side, that energetic side, to actually know what's in your heart, as it were. How would you suggest that people begin that process of checking in, of reflecting, to recognize what is present there and how that works or doesn't work with what they've learned intellectually? How do you bridge that space? Big.
Oh gosh, this is big. And I struggled with it for, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years. That kind of gives away that I've been around for a while. So it took me a very long time because um, I like to journal. And as a kid, as a much younger person, I loved to journal, but I also loved my notes to be tidy, to be beautiful. And so I would go back and reread them in good conscious, that I will go and learn from my own experience. And then when I was reading them, it's like, that doesn't even sound like me, let alone what I was experiencing at that moment. So it was, in first place, it was trading form and beauty, aesthetical content for authenticity.
Mm.
And I agreed with myself, okay, I still want to have neat notes, but I will start jotting things down on pieces of paper and maybe rewrite, and in rewriting process without actually altering. Maybe find a layer deeper that I might forgotten the moment I was jotting down, and I'll go back in a second to what exactly are you jotting down. And tease out deeper layer, but not focused on how am I making this to sound prettier. So that's like the least concern. So, for example, let's say that I'm trying to connect with runes. I read runes, so runes are my go-to for many purposes. But let's say that I'm taking on a new set or a new alphabet because I use Elder Futhark. I'm in team with Elder Futhark. Let's say that I want to get into younger Futhark. So I would start my journey with every single rune and doodle and air, write it and see in what part of my body it resonates. Where do I feel it? Let's say that I know nothing about it. So I'm not jumping into reading what that is about. I promise I'm bringing it to fairy experiences in a
Mm.
second. So, um, what color? If I am to assign a color to this sign what color would I give it? I know its name because I can read it, right? How to pronounce, I don't know, Ansus, for example. If I'm saying Ansus, where do I feel it? If I'm to give it a color, what color would that be? What texture, if I'm to assign it a texture? And just jot down everything that comes without trying to express it neatly, but like directly from the heart. And it may be something ugly. It could be mud or other things that are less appealing, to write about or put on paper, and it makes me want to throw up or what have you. Write it as such. It's just for you to know. And then once you have those and see how you feel, what exactly that brings into you, go and to what is known from the rune poems. Now leave the runes here and shift into fairy lore and folklore. Let's say that you're in a space where you want to connect with the spirits, with the land spirits, or if there are any fairy beings who use that space either to dwell, or it's a space that's actually a portal in between the worlds. Listen to your heart when you approach that space. And if in your heart you get a no, get out of here, honor that. You may pause and announce that you're bringing offerings, you're there to learn, you're asking kindly, so do not act entitled. If the no is still no, take that. You may have to come back at a different time, or you may simply be directed somewhere else where some other being is more than happy to share with you. It may just not be in that particular location. So, assuming that you get a yes, then you walk into the space. The rule that I learned is always have offerings to present the beings of the space with, and it can be fresh water. Be aware of what is the local flora and fauna. You don't want to bring something that is going to mold and destroy the patch of flowers that you're putting it on. If it's a tree, like a big tree, if you leave a little bit of cheese or yogurt at its root, the tree is not going to mind it. But if you're going to dump that on some sensitive spring flowers, they will mind it. Careful if you're pouring out alcohol. Check in with what is known and how do you feel about it. So water, fresh fruit, seeds, this ain't gonna hurt anybody. So present this. And then you sit down and meditate. Find a place that appeals to you to sit 5 minutes, 10 minutes quiet. And as you're sitting there 5 minutes, 10 minutes quiet, let go of your agenda of connecting with the beings of the place. You announce your intention and then let go and see what's happening. You may close your eyes. You may notice what sensations occur. How is the wind? How does the air temperature changes if it changes? Sunlight, how it varies. Does it get darker without any explanation? Does it get brighter? Birds. How is the environment responding to your presence? Don't judge, don't try to label, don't try to categorize, just sit down and take it in. And then once you took this in, be aware of what thoughts come up, what sensation, feelings, images. If you're the visual person, then pay attention to images. If you're the aphantasic type who cannot form images, no big deal. You have 25 other channels. You have your other senses to inform you whether there is or there isn't something happening around you. How do you feel in your heart? Is it joy? Is it lightness? Is it happiness? Is it any fragment of thought, of song cropping in your mind? So take note of all that. And as quickly as you decide to come out of your 5 minutes, 10 minutes meditative, introducing yourself to the energy of the space, connecting with the energy of the space. As soon as you come out, start writing down, unfiltered. Nouns, verbs, whatever, descriptors, interjections, onomatopoeics, whatever, put it down. And then later on, go and read what is it known about this space from the lore. If it exists. Does it have any legend regarding spirit beings in there? What is it known from the populations native to the area? How were they treating? Now, something that I absolutely must say is fairy population has mobility. There is no surprise to encounter and deal with the Alvar on the American soil or being somewhere and expect to encounter people from among the ASG and encounter something completely diverse that doesn't belong to the local land-based culture. So you will try then to find out, make sense of your own experience by looking through what is known from other bodies of lore. And little by little, you start pulling things together, and then you may go back for round 2 and round 3 and round 4 until you'll notice that communication is easier and full form thoughts come in, sometimes instructions, sometimes you need to do this. Sometimes it's going to be a title, and it's like, is this a song? Is this a book? Is it an article that I need to write? Is it something I need to contribute to make it known in the world? So this is how it starts. It's from the heart and from what you experience, and then absolutely the layer of cross-referencing, checking out, align your experiences with what is already known, know the difference and know to articulate the difference. This is my personal UPG, undocumented personal gnosis, and this is what is actually traditional lore and folklore known in the culture. So one is not substitute for the other. They need to go hand in hand. And sometimes they align quite well. Sometimes they don't align. Doesn't mean that you have to discard your experience because it's not found in the lore. However, don't present it as universal because it's yours, and be okay with that. So I know this was long, but I hope it helps.
Well, it's that piece, isn't it, about your experience with those beings is about your relationship with them and their relationship with you.
Yes, exactly.
Just as we can look up cultural norms in a country foreign to us and
Mm-hmm.
get an idea of what to expect, once we
Mm-hmm.
actually go there and meet the people, or if some of them come to visit you and you're like hosting someone, you may find that actually they're those individuals are different around you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Like these are people too, yeah, as you said.
No, no,
They
yeah, they are people. So personhood is I would say acknowledging personhood is the baseline. That's where you start. You cannot, that's not a person. Don't even bother to interact because it's not going to end well.
yeah. And also like why would you want to? Like why would someone want to if they didn't recognize that these are people? Yeah, people are strange.
Entitlement.
Yeah.
I am the superior. I am the pinnacle of creation, and everything else is subservient.
Yeah.
So that kind of attitude, and I can use everything as commodity and disposable commodities. So that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So keep that ego in check a little bit.
Yeah. Like what do you expect is going to happen if people who are bigger and older than you, who have been around for much longer, if they do hear you trying to boss them around and they decide that they want to teach you a lesson rather than just ignore you? Like, what do you think is going to happen? That's a rhetorical question. So
Yes.
it's that piece about like holding both the personal experience and understanding what is more general, finding what is in the lore, LORE, and the stories,
Hmm.
the culture, and the locality.
Hmm.
So where do you recommend? How do you recommend people begin to find what is lore in that area and discern what is actually lore in that area as opposed to something that someone has gone, I've had this experience, and they're presenting it as lore? How do people start to make that discernment?
I have something that has become like a chorus line that I'm repeating it to obsessive to obsession, level of obsession. Read. Read the lore. And read sources and read authors that know what they're talking about. Um, Read pagan portal books.
Mm,
And this is not because we are writing for Moon Books and some of our books end up in the pagan portal collection, but these are very solid sources written by people with a really good grasp and balance in between bringing on board their personal experience with what they learn and research. And I will underscore here research with like many lines
yeah.
and write it in capitals. They really took the time to research um, electronic formats and libraries
Mm,
and hard, not hardcover, paper copies of the material that they are referencing in those books. So, Halo Queen, she has great work on the topic of fairies, and it's written everything from this animistic perspective and common sense perspective. Morgan Daimler, and every single person that I can think off the top of my head right now in moon books and in pagan portals, they do have this approach. So try to find, let's say that you are interested in a specific culture, fairy beings from a specific culture that is not necessarily the culture of the place where you live. Like my example here, I'm um, leaning very much into the Norse. I'm a heathen, as I said. So the elves and the Alvar, that's very much who am I interacting with in terms of, spirit allies. Although I do come from Romania and I had experiences and exposure to Romanian fairy beings. At some point in time, they had less of an interest in me, so they had an assignment. And once I completed that assignment, it was my first book actually, Parallels between Romanian and Irish fairy traditions. So once that was released, I was told that I'm done with the contract, and I look very quizzical. I'm like, what contract? And they reminded me of something that I had said 40 years or over 40 years. And I really get the impression that I'm old, which I am. So I said that like over 40 years ago, and it was clearly in their book of records, no longer on my mind. So I was basically, yeah, I still get a sense, I know they're there, but they're not present in my life. More so, I live in the United States, and I acknowledge that I live on land that's been colonized, and the spirit beings of this land do not receive the amount of recognition and expressed respect that they should. So I talked to people who are native, indigenous people, and they told me, corn and tobacco. Now, I don't engage into any ceremony the way they would do it, simply because, for one, it doesn't speak to me as a spiritual path. Two, they told me they're kind of reluctant to share some things, and I respect that. So they shared with me quite a bit of things, and I said, look, I don't uh, ask in order for me to copy and parrot, because if it's not something that it feels authentic, it's going to be parroting, and that's going to be more disrespectful than actually useful for anybody. But I can surely leave some cornmeal and tobacco and fresh water for the spirits of the land. So that's surely not going to hurt. And then make offerings in a way that are specific to the Alvar and to the land vater, the land spirits, that, as I said, they may come across and interact with me where I am, and have a whole ritual in which I engage with them. So, which is, in accordance with my beliefs and what's my spiritual and religious path. So notice, or I hope I explained it well enough to make it noticeable, the idea of balance. I do not have to engage in a ritual that I do not feel as authentic or appropriate for me to engage with, but this doesn't preclude presenting the offerings and saying, I acknowledge your presence here, and thank you so much for allowing me to do this ritual, this practice here in my backyard, because that's really my spirituality. Failing to bring those offerings would be like coming to someone's house uninvited, unannounced, and also bring like 20 people with me, and now let's have a party. We didn't ask for permission. You didn't know we're coming, but here we are, and now we're also throwing a party at your house. It may be fun. The person may be actually, yeah, sure, let's do it. Or, what the heck? Where are your manners? So again, personhood, acknowledge the personhood within the beings that you're interacting with, whether you see them, you don't see them, whether you feel them strong or faint or not at all. Just be aware they're there.
Absolutely. One of the things that I really like about the Pagan Portals series, as both a writer and as a reader as well, is that they are written by people by real people
Yes.
who care.
Yes.
And we do make mistakes. Like they are not infallible. And so I encourage you to actually like engage with the material in them, including in my books, and to follow up on sources. If a source is
Mm-hmm.
presented somewhere, to go and seek it out. So I share lots of stories in mine, and then my goal is to give the keys to how do you interpret a story to get the information that you need, and how do you relate to it. But go and look up other versions of those stories. If people have lots of sources and references and citations, follow up on the citations and go and read the sources that they're drawing on. That gives you that extra thread. And so the pagan portals, both practically, if you engage with them practically, they are portals, they are doorways. And if you engage with them intellectually and follow up like those threads, they are portals into the research. So they're portals in many ways. And every book can be treated like this. Every book should be a way of opening a door deeper into your own experience and your own research and knowledge, wherever it is that, because obviously different people are further down the research rabbit hole than others, and you don't have to have like a library, like you've got books behind you. Yeah, me too.
Oh, you don't see the books on the other side of the room.
No, or under my bed, or yeah,
I know.
yeah. It's that like not, you don't have to be that deep in that you have a whole library on the whole things, but reading is one of the main ways that we can find those sources. And also, once you've found the authors, the books, the sources that speak to you, go and see if those people are talking, if they're giving talks, if they're giving interviews, if they're giving classes, so that you can go
Mm-hmm.
and ask questions directly and talk it person to person and share your experiences and ask for reflections. And you don't have to take what they say as the truth, but it can hopefully add extra layers. On
I've
which,
been nodding my heads off here to every bit of everything you say, and something that I want you to underline
yeah,
more through the story that I gave is read the sources, engage with what the authors put in the books, especially when they give like practical exercises,
mm-hmm.
following them into the classes and the workshops that they offer. And there is also the aspect of listening to people who are of the place.
Yes,
And some of them may actually have formed their impressions and opinions about their culture from very newly written material and sources that are AI written actually. So, and that's sad, but it happens. So always cross references and reading more than just one source, avoiding the echo chambers.
mm-hmm.
Personally, if I go into a library, I will surely reach for the books and for the titles that appeal to me. But sometimes I know that I have to sit down and listen at least a little bit to opinions that are not exactly in alignment, because there's something to learn from there as well. Not to spend an awful lot of time, but just being aware of what other people think and maybe why do they think the way they do.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
What experiences and what information have they found
hmm
that you haven't, that can give you that context? Absolutely. Thank you.
yep.
So, on the note of listening to people and following up on interacting with living human beings, and I just wanted to add to what you were saying, that when you're listening to the people who are looking for people who are local to you, who have stories about the spirits of the land, have experiences that they may not be pagan. In fact, there's a
Hmm.
good
No,
chance.
no, they're not.
Yeah. And it's about going and hanging out in community
Hmm.
and not asking, oh, teach me magic, teach me how to see spirits, but like, tell me about your life.
Hmm.
Listening to people sharing just their local stories, even hanging out in the local church if you're
Hmm.
comfortable doing that, and chatting to the old folk and helping them polish brass and pour tea. It's about being in community, and that's where you start to listen, and they will talk about their spiritual experiences in the context of their faith,
Hmm. Yep, that's
and that is a
beautiful.
part of the land as well. Yeah, yeah.
That's beautiful. Yep.
So, Daniela, you have an exercise to share with us, a practical
Oh,
piece to share
yes.
with us, because this is part of re-enchanting the world, is not just listening to us talk about things, but actually also have some things to go away and do. So go and sit and like find out what the offerings are in your area, as Daniela said, and take them and be respectful with and conscientious about how you're where you're leaving them, and sit and meditate with the land. But also you have a piece for with us. Would you like to tell us what it's for and why this?
Why? I'll start with the why because the whys are so important.
Mm.
Um, when we're talking about pagans and reconnecting with nature and re-enchanting the world and leave the magic and breathe the magic, it all sounds so beautiful and inspiring and serene and settling. But how many times life doesn't pull the rug from underneath our feet collectively? How many times things just happen, um, and it is impossible to go through all this like a swan or a duck or a mallard, just swimming and without water actually catching on your feathers. It's impossible. Whatever we go through, whether it's interacting with rambunctious kids, misunderstandings with spouses or partners or work, or things that are happening around us in more general level, no matter how much we're trying to stay grounded and sheltered, things still catch on us. Which again takes us to the very, very first part of our discussion. What's in your heart? That informs your rituals and that informs the efficiency of what you're doing. So if you're not in the right heart space, it's very hard to really be in the right head space, and therefore you're less efficient in terms of what you can achieve magically or otherwise. So self-cleansing, this etheric, energetic hygiene is very important. Whether you truly believe in the necessity or the efficiency of energetic hygiene or not, that's up to the individual. However, even if you take it at the most surface level as an act by which you decide consciously, willfully, this is my way to find closure
Mm.
around the hardship or the unpleasantness that I'm been dealing with at the moment, that's still worthy and strong enough. Now, if you choose to look deeper into what can be learned from folklore and other um, time-tested sources of magical practice, what can you learn about yarn and tying things, binding them in ways that no longer have powers over you? Or what can you learn about different plants? Then you know that you have allies and you have other, not props, but solid ingredients to bring to your um, little ritual through which you find closure and thus cleanse your mind and your energetic field of what is um, unnecessary. So what you need is yarn. I happen to have black yarn here, but it can be any color that you would associate with cleansing, any color that you would associate with capturing, holding, and blocking. So I think of yarn because I think of yarn for two reasons. So this is wool, natural wool fibers. They have these little hooks which make actually the fibers, the hairs stick onto each other and they can be spun. So this is something that I spun myself. So yeah. Um, you can get any kind of pre already made, already spun wool. You don't have to spin it yourself. So I'm going to get the wool because it's sticky and things attached to wool. Black because I associate black with the power to absorb. Leave a piece of black cloth in the sunlight and you see what it does. So that absorbency and retaining property that it has. And I'm just going to wrap it around my fingers. I don't have a fixed number. You just put some, on 2 or 3 fingers. And I'm going to use it either just like this or like this, okay, as a brush. And I'll go through my field and I want everything from head to toes, brushing over my body. You can do this before taking a shower ritual and actually touch your skin with this, particularly if there's areas where you feel tightness in the body, like you've been stressed and like this the whole day. Maybe you want to insist on those areas. And you brush. And as you're brushing, just exhale. And with each exhale, you're going to breathe out whatever burdens you. If you want to make this super fancy, so this is like the quick thing, you just wrap some wool and you start rubbing. If you want to make it super fancy, plant allies. Here I have mugwort, vervain, St. John's wort, and frankincense. Before jumping, so bits of plant, put the oil on top, bless it, charge it, that's it. If you're working with spirit allies, be aware that fairy-wise, fairy beings, many of them do not agree with mugwort and with St. John's wort. So there's historical material, medical, leech books talking about how fairy possession or fairy presence can be averted if you're using mugwort. Same about St. John's wort. In Irish culture, it's no St. John's wort. It banishes the presence of the ASG. So my take on that is that everything that's hail, holly, an herb that's hail and holly will not repel a spirit being that is also hail and holly, but it will repel the other. So that's my take on it. See, how do you reconciliate lore and folklore with the properties of the plant itself and what your allies, your fairy allies and spirits have to say about it. So choose anything that's related to cleansing. I only need a teeny tiny bit that I'm going to rub onto my yarn here and do the brushing, okay? And everything insist in the areas where doing the chest, the solar plexus, and doing the legs, soles of the feet, yeah, palms of my hands. And once I'm done cleaning, what I do, I'm going to entangle this and tie it in a knot and say, everything that was ailing me, everything that was holding on to me and was ailing me, it's now tied and impossible to act upon me anymore. And this is so, and it's going straight into the trash can, as fancy as that. Oh, that feels a lot better, actually.
I love how you kind of brightened up as you got to the end of
I feel it. I feel it. It's like, I really do feel a whole lot lighter.
Oh, how wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. This
Very
is
welcome.
wonderful, wonderful piece for people to go away. So there's been quite a few pieces throughout our conversation that our listeners can actually go and do. So if you have been listening, like just have a think back, have a reflect back over any of the suggestions within, any of the thoughts within, and see which of those pieces of information like really inspired you that maybe you might want to make a note of, not necessarily a pretty note, just a note that is true, and which of the pieces maybe you're going to go away and do. And that cleansing is just a beautiful place to start. Give it a go and see how it feels. So you've got the information in your head now, and now you can try it and see how it feels. And this is part of the practice of re-enchanting the world as witches, as magicians, as druids, as pagans, as magic weavers, is the doing of the magic. So let this be a portal, let this open a door for you. Try it, see how it feels with a heart that is open to the experience. There's one piece that I really, really love about the fact that you used yarn in this, and that is that through our conversation, we've had those parallels between the fair folk, the fairies, and the fate weavers, the spinners, the Norns, and that piece of the fair folk, the fairies being named for fate, for those that are fated and those that weave fate, and for the Norns being the ones that spin those cords of life, of fate. You see it all flow all the way through. I find that absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. That was, you summed it up so beautifully and so meaningfully.
Well, let's tie that in a knot for people to remember. And Daniela, where can people find you next over the coming months? This episode should air hopefully in the middle of February. So it'll be
Mhm.
just before, just after Valentine's Day. So where can people find you? What classes have you got coming up next? Where are your books?
My books can be found on Amazon, Daniela Simina. All my published work is there. You can Barnes and Noble, if you do not like buying from Amazon, Barnes and Noble also carry. And if you get from Amazon the titles of my work, I can quickly show here three of them. So this is the Where Fairies Meet. That's the parallel between Irish and Romanian fairy traditions. This is a fairy path. This is actually autobiographic, and the end of it has like a good chunk of my magical journal, like a re-updating of the magical lab journal I kept as a child. So this is lots of fairy magic as I experienced it when I grew up. And this is the book I wish I had when I realized that my path encompasses multiple cultures, straddles Romanian and Irish and Norse-Germanic, and how do you work with herbs so you do not antagonize beings from another culture. So now that you know what to look for, again, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I am on Instagram, Daniela Simina 1. I am on TikTok as Whispers in the Twilight. And I currently teach the classes in person. I am here in Georgia. So if you go for Daniela Simina author page on Facebook, that's where I update. That's my calendar. That's where my calendar of events is always on display. So if you are in Georgia, that's where I am in Georgia. So if you are in Georgia, US, then you can come to the local events and classes that I teach. But that will change in the sense that I will have more online classes starting probably March. So stay tuned for the update.
That's very exciting. So I will put all of those links in the description for this
Thank you.
episode. No problem. I want people to be able to find you because your work is fabulous
Oh,
and
thank you.
you are a kindred spirit, I feel like on the
Oh, thank you.
here with our good neighbors working the same path. So do look Daniela Simina up, find her work, follow her all the places. And while I'm saying those words, click like, follow, subscribe, and share this conversation with someone who you think will get a kick out of it. It's the reason that we have these conversations, the reason that we write, the reason that we teach, the reason that we do our work is to help to support your magic and to re-enchant the world together with you in community with the human persons and with the non-human persons, all of the fair folk and yourself. So let's work together to do that. To my listeners, was there anything else you would like to say before we close this episode, Daniela?
Endless gratitude to our listeners. Yes, share this, because in sharing, we are increasing awareness, spreading the good news, and strengthening our community. And thank you, Hello Queen, for inviting me to this episode. It's a great pleasure.
You are very, very welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
I hope to work together with you in the future.
Mm-hmm.
To our listeners, thank you. Remember to check out Daniela's work, to come and join me in the Enchanted Academy, link, bio, description, all the places where we actually have monthly full moon circles online, engaging with and sharing folklore and practices from wherever you are in the world, and working with going and visiting the fair folk and doing some of that fairy practice. So you can come and join that, and perhaps I'll be able to convince Daniela to come and be a guest at one of those sometime.
I was thinking the exact same thought. It's like, okay, when is your next one?
Excellent.
I was just as like, oh my gosh, that's something that how could I have missed it until now?
Here is me
Seriously.
sharing with you. So do come along and join in, and
Mm-hmm.
a place to work some fairy magic and to work with them and to share with each other, as I hope all of our places are. So until then, until next time, may your way be enchanted. May your hearts be blessed. May your mind, body, spirit, soul, heart, desires, love, all be in alignment, that your magic reaches out and re-enchants the world with beauty, balance, community, and delight.
Thank you.
Thank you.